Welcome back to Simple Truth. Last week we were talking about Hosea and God doing weird things. So listen, when I think of weird things, I just think of summer. So I brought Summer in again on Simple Truths. Now, listen, those of you who are watching this are going to think this is a little awkward, right, on the whole topic and bring Summer in for that whole thing. I want you to know that's not why I brought her in any way, shape, or form. I brought her in just to get also a woman's perspective on this, because there's a guy's perspective on this, right? And then there's a woman's perspective on the Bible as well. Sometimes those things line up. Sometimes for good reasons, we should be listening to each other, right? So, Summer, last week you weren't here, and I was talking to the people of our little world here in Josh Ministries about doing weird things, right? Doing different things. That sometimes God steps in and he says, hey, listen, I got an assignment for you, 007. Like it's a special assignment, right? Or, hey, I've got a mission for you if you choose to accept it. But it's not going to be like everybody else's mission, right? So, first of all, if you were the sister of Hosea, right? If you were the mom of Hosea, if you were, a woman in Hosea's life, and he came back from a little meeting with God, right? And he says, hey, listen, guys, I just heard from God. And here's what God told me. God told me I should go marry a prostitute and have children with her because God's upset with people. Right? Is there any part of that whole thing that you would say, like, oh, yeah, that makes sense to me?
No.
No. And as a protective sister of somebody, right, would you want that for your reputable brother?
Well, I mean, I'm the weirdo, so I'm not the right person to ask this.
But if you were normal,
if I was
weirdo,
normal, I would say no way.
Right, like I have two sisters. I can't imagine either one of them being like, whoa, yay, Andy, go, Andy, go, Andy. Like, that's great. First of all, I think they would probably be questioning my conversation nobility with God. Right? Like, wait, did you really hear from God, or did you just listen to yourself? Right?
Very pretty woman.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm expecting that Gomer was a knockout, right? Because Hosea could have picked anyone. God didn't give a name and say, hey, I picked out this prostitute for you to go marry, right? God said, you go pick out a prostitute. I'm hoping that he picked out at least a nice one, right? Or a beautiful one. That would make some sense to most guys. But most women aren't looking at this and saying this makes sense, right? So let me back that up, because it's going to sound a little bit more like a Seeds episode, but the question still is important. What do we do when reputable people in our lives come to us and say, God's asking me to do something really weird and different right now?
I mean, I like weird and different, so I would be like, I would walk them through it and be like, okay, like, tell me how you got here. How did this conversation with God go? And I would pray with them and make sure, like, as much as I could, that they actually heard from God. But I am certainly not the person to say, like, God wouldn't tell you to do something crazy.
Okay, so now let's start with the obvious. Do you think you're normal?
No.
All right. So, listen, if you're listening to this today, you would probably agree with that, right? Summer's not normal, not just because she's sitting here with me doing this show, but because just on a normal, everyday basis, she's just not normal, right? So the normal person, though, Summer, what would they think about this whole thing? Do you think that they'd be arguing with Hosea and saying, hey, hold on, that's not how God works?
Well, yeah, or they would just disown him.
They would disown him.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing that you can get disowned by listening to what God is saying?
Oh, for sure.
That's an amazing concept, that in our churches, that we could actually have people who are actually hearing from God, and we're disowning them because we don't like the message, or we don't think our God would do that message.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Right? So, in the story, anyway, I just spent, half of our time reviewing, right? And saying to you, like, hey, here's the deal, right? And it's not like you weren't actually producing the show and didn't hear it. So we went through that whole thing, right? We got to hopefully it's verse 3, right? And Hosea hears this. He gets his marching orders from the Lord. Now's the time that really matters, right? So you used 3 words on Sunday up at our church in Lakeview. What were those 3 words?
Gather, hear, and hearken.
Okay. So my take on this would be that somehow Hosea gathered himself together and he heard from God, right? So he gathered and he heard from God. What's your idea behind the idea of hearken?
You have to do something. I mean, it's the abide, it's the obey, it's the, once you hear, you have an obligation. You can't say I didn't hear it if you heard it.
Excellent.
So you got to do something.
You got to do something,
Got to
right?
do something.
All right, so we get this weird thing, and all of a sudden Hosea's got to do something, right? He's got to make a choice. Either you're going to be obedient or you're not going to be obedient, right? So verse 3 in your version says what?
So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblam, which conceived and bare him a son.
Beautiful. So we know that Hosea did it, right? He goes, he takes Gomer. Like she is just the love of his world, right? Been waiting his whole life for her. Or maybe not. He went and he picked out a prostitute, right? And that was the first part. But the second part was he also had to have children. Again, understand, like this is a big deal because in this time, having children was important. Having a son was important. But heritage is important. So Hosea, like he's compromising here, finding a woman that does not represent what God is supposed to be all about, and then having a son, his heir, his inheritance, right? And we know that all of this is because God looks down and he's like, this is how I feel about the Israelites. They are my heir and they don't care, right? They're illegitimate. They're selling themselves to other gods. They're selling themselves to other idols, to other things, to other people. They're just selling out. They're not in tune with me. So a lot of times, like we said last week, God says, I need you to understand how I'm feeling. I need you to understand how I see this situation, right? Yeah. All right. Go forward a couple pages to chapter 3 with me, because in the midst of this, we get the story. So Hosea, he not only has one child with Gomer, but he goes above and beyond what God has asked him to do, right? He's got multiple children with her, right? And then there's a problem, right? So pick up in verse 3. I want you to read like all of chapter 3 in Hosea for me. Like, I mean, this is a big read. Ready?
Yeah, whole couple sentences. Then said the Lord unto me, go yet, love a woman beloved of her friend, yet an adulteress, according to the love of the Lord toward the children of Israel, who took to other gods and loved flagons of wine. So I bought her to me for 15 pieces of silver, and for a homer of barley, and a half homer of barley. And I said unto her, thou shalt abide for me many days, thou shalt not play the harlot, and thou shalt not be for another man, so will I also be for thee. For the children of Israel shall abide many days without a king, and without a prince, and without a sacrifice, without an image, and without an ephod, and without teraphim. Afterward shall the children of Israel return and seek the Lord their God, and David their king, and shall fear the Lord and his goodness in the latter days.
Okay, so there's a lot of chapters in the Bible. A ton of different chapters in the Bible. You can go all over, find Psalm 23, you can find all kinds of great chapters, but you are not going to find a chapter that it looks like this, right? So 4 verses, and God lays out, again, how he feels, what he's thinking about the situation that the Israelites have put him in, right? So our hero, the hero in the story, Hosea, right? He goes out, marries the prostitute, has kids with her, and his reward for, by the way, redeeming somebody, right, is she leaves him and the children, and she goes off to another man. So she returns to her lifestyle of prostitution, right? How often is it that you and I, in pastoral roles, see people returning to that which they know how to do best?
I mean, always.
So we see that a lot, right?
Yeah.
Even in our own lives, it's hard sometimes not to revert back to thought processes, feelings, situations, places where we've been that we're really familiar with, right? And so Gomer does this. She returns back to that which she knows best. Remember, Gomer didn't have a choice in this whole matter either, right? Back in this time, women are objects, possessions. So Hosea just would have said, I want that woman, right? It's the caveman thing. He would have knocked her over the head with a club, dragged her back into the cave, right? Or the tent. And she is his wife, right? But she didn't really have a say in it. And nowhere in the middle of it did she leave or forsake that which she was about. He just took her and took her home, right? Mm-hmm. So she leaves, and she leaves for another man, right? And then God asks the third of crazy things, right? So the first was marry a prostitute. The second, have children with that prostitute, right? Mm-hmm. Which by definition really doesn't work because most prostitutes don't have children, right? The third thing he asks is for Hosea to do what?
To buy her back.
To go buy her back. So it's not enough that he got her the first time. He's now got to pay money for that which is actually his.
Right. Not just get her, just buy her.
Buy her back, right? All of this is because God is setting up an object lesson, which I love object lessons, right? God is setting up an object lesson that shows how he sees something, right? All right, so let's wrap this up, and I want to pick your brain, and I want you to give me some insight, maybe into today, right? Is God done showing people how he feels and what he thinks?
No way.
Is God done showing people who he is?
No.
So in a world that has perverted the word love to an unbelievable standard, right? Which you and I would agree on, but just for our listeners, your definition of what the world thinks love is right now would be summarized as what?
I think the world thinks that love is just compromise and acceptance of anything that people do. That's it.
Right. So anything that makes you happy, if I love you, I let you do that.
Yep.
Right? And love should just be one big happy feeling.
Yep.
All the time.
Yep.
We look at this story, and I think what God is trying to say is, I'm not feeling loved. Right? You're all not making me very happy.
Yep.
Here's how I really feel about this whole thing, right? But he goes on to really show and define what his love is, right? Even though you're doing all this stuff, I still love you. I still want you. He goes on, and here Hosea says, listen, you need to come back with me, right? You must not dwell with anybody else before. You got to keep me. I love you enough to buy you back, and I love you enough to say, stay with me, right? Now, again, the world's definition of this love thing is way out of whack, right? Do you think that it makes sense today that God would be bringing forth examples of what his love really is?
Well, yeah, I think he would want us to. I think he's trying, for sure, because I think all forms of love have been screwed up. Totally. From acquaintances to friends to how he treats strangers to marriages.
Do you think that God would do that? Would raise up examples of his love in unique and weird ways?
Yeah.
So why then, or actually let me rephrase that to say, how then do we form and fashion our Christianity in such a way as to be open to the examples that God may be having for us or be presenting before us?
That's hard. That's super hard for everybody. But I mean, it always goes back to love, and it starts with loving God. And it starts with a relationship with God and showing him that you love him. I always say love is actions, it's not words. So I think if you love God and you know God and you're putting effort into the relationship with him and you know his word and you're spending time with him, then you know how he functions, even though you don't know how he functions, if that makes any sense. But and you would be open to it, and you would start seeing things in your own life that you knew were God, and it would shock you and amaze you and surprise you, and then I think you'd be more open to seeing all these things and not just shunning people and thinking it's crazy, because God clearly just does crazy stuff.
It's fantastic. So listen, I want to wrap this up today. Next week, I want to talk about I want to do a special. I'm going to keep summer on. And we're going to talk about non-Valentine's Day love. And she doesn't know that. She just heard that. So we're gonna talk about what does it mean to actually follow this whole thing through. So hope that you look at the book of Hosea. Hope you read the story again, that you're just as shocked as I am and always am when I read it about what God actually would ask people to do that would actually represent him. So think about that this week as you're going out and about, whatever you're doing. What might God ask you to do that would represent how he feels about the people around you?